Good morning. Today is Wednesday, March 13th, 2024. It's 9 a.m. This is the meeting of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We're taking work again on Bill S-253, actually looking to building energy codes. So the world of building and construction and energy efficiency, two favorite things. So we don't have Kelly here yet.
Kelly's
Oh, there she is. We have virtual Kelly. Good morning, Ms. Launder. So we wanted to just set the stage for today. We have in 253, we're talking about making some additions, but it's still going to be a relatively narrow bill. The Act 47 Working Group report offered a huge number of things to get done over a period of time. So the plan for the time being is to move this bill forward to keep an oar in the water and make significant progress on a number of things. And I also expect that when it goes to the House, they may consider adding more features to the bill as well. So, but we have a hard stop with crossover Friday, so we're gonna constrain ourselves to getting something good done, not aiming for perfect this week. So, Ms. Launder, you played a major role in helping run the work group this summer. Have you had a chance to review 253?
Yes, I have.
Great. Do you want, so the floor is yours, but I just wanted to set that broader context and see if you have any thoughts to share with the committee, and particular if there's anything about 253 that you would recommend we consider making changes.
Great, thank you. Again, for the record, I'm Kelly Launder. I'm the Assistant Director of the Efficiency and Energy Resources Division in the Department of Public Service. I wasn't clear if there was anything beyond the existing language of S-253 that you wanted me to speak about, so that I just have some really brief comments on the existing language, and happy to answer any questions or anything after that. So first, in regards to the working group that's named in the legislation, the department's very happy to participate in the working group. I know when there was a walkthrough of the bill, there was a suggestion that perhaps the department could take on the administrative and legal assistance pieces along with the technical assistance piece we're currently identified with. And I just want to say that running those working groups are quite a resource strain on our small department, and particularly putting together the report at the end. We did have assistance. We had some federal funding to use, and we're able to hire a contractor to help this time. So it was a little bit less of a strain, but that money has been fully expended. So just want to note that concern of any change in the language. We'd like it to stay as it is with Ledge Council assistance. And I did have a question that there's language suggesting the working group can hire a consultant again. But it wasn't clear to me if there's also going to be an appropriation of funding for that. I just wasn't, that's the question I had.
Okay, thank you.
And then I would also request there's an end date, maybe of a year, again, due to the amount of resources it takes to run these working groups, and for participants, frankly, to participate in it. It's a lot of work. And I noted that it seems to continue on in perpetuity without any kind of end date. So that's all I had on the working group component. I don't know if you want me to stop there for further discussion or go to the second piece about the language change.
Sure. On the working group, Richard Fazy was in. Going over the report at a high level, and then we drilled down into a smaller subset, the A2 through A6 section of the recommendations. And he's also applied for, I think, and received DOE grant money. So I think part of the conversation we want to have between here and the finish line is whether or not any of those funds would be eligible for supporting the work of the group in a manner like the way he helped support our working group this past summer and fall. Because clearly he was a big help to the working group. Or he is too.
Great.
Anything else on the language in the bill, like the sort of may shall question that came up?
Yep, that was the next thing I was going to talk about. The department is supportive of that language that provides flexibility and whether the standards are updated after the issuance of updated standards under the International Energy Conservation Code, particularly given that there's a goal for net zero ready standards by 2030. And after that point, there may not need to be amendments on a regular basis. I would also be agreeable to including language requiring the department to submit something to the legislative committees of jurisdiction, indicating our intent to update the standards or not after a new IECC is passed, if that would be helpful, and to address any concerns about the department just choosing not to update without, providing any reason for that. I mean, my assumption would be that the IECC didn't move forward beyond what we had passed, and that's would be the reason that we wouldn't move forward, or due to other concerns that we've heard from builders about enforcement. So, but happy to see language like that added if that's helpful.
Yeah, better to be explicit than people. The absence of a change isn't a very definitive signal.
Right. Right. We have to provide a similar kind of explanation actually to the U.S. Department of Energy after the IECCs are updated. For the residential, we have to do the same thing, say we reviewed it and let them know if we're updating to it or not, and why. For commercial, we actually have to update to the newest IECC, and after a period of time, DOE will issue a certification requirement, and we have to say whether we've met it or not. And if you don't, it could impact the state's ability to get U.S. Department of Energy federal funding.
Okay. So if the currently on July 1st of 24, the last revision to the rules is scheduled to go into effect. If that were not to happen, then you would have to, then you would fail to be certified by DOE for maintaining currency with the energy code.
Well, like I said, the residential and the commercial are a little different. The residential, we were not required to update it. We just have to say if we reviewed it, and if not, why not.
Okay.
Commercial, it's a ways out. Like, it's not the year after it's put into place. It's usually within a few years. DOE will ask us to certify whether we've updated it to or not. It or not.
Great, thank you. Many questions for Ms. London, or anything else that you wanted to discuss? I know it's not a long bill right now.
Yeah, I was pretty short. That was all I had.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for on behalf of the committee, thanks for all your leadership on the work group this past summer and fall.
Yep.
All right. With that, thank you. I'd like to invite our colleagues from the Secretary of State's office of OPR.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I don't know if you've ever been in this committee before, maybe not.
I don't think I have.
We're way overdue. That's
Well, that's why we're here today. It's not this conversation. For the record, my name is Lauren Hibbert, and I am the Deputy Secretary of State. My name is Lauren Lehman. I'm General Counsel for the Office of Special Legislation. Thank you so much for coming here to talk about the residential home contractors program with us. We have reviewed the bill and support the working group. And thought it would be helpful to just give this committee, since we haven't testified in front of this committee, a background of why we're here, how we got here, since this isn't our normal space. And then what we're doing right now. So I'm gonna give the background, which is that the Office of Professional Regulation has worked on creating a registry for home contractors for approximately 5 years. We did file testimony, although it's not on your website because the wrong testimony was attached to Lauren Lehman's name. So as you were looking, it's okay. I just was looking and I was like, oh no, I just realized it, I apologize. But it will be, I'm confident, and we began looking at residential contractors in 2017, in earnest in 2018. And then ultimately we filed a report in 2019, a Sunrise report. And we were asked to do this because there's a lot of conversations occurring in the State House around consumer fraud from home contractors. The Attorney General's office does have the Consumer Assistance Program, where consumers can reach out to them if they have encountered issues with all sorts of companies, including home contractors. Home contractors is unfortunately, I believe, always vacillating between their second and third highest category of complaints. And the legislature, the Attorney General's office, and ultimately the Office of Professional Regulation became involved in a conversation about how can we help, how can we assist. So we did what's called a Sunrise review, that's in chapter 57 of Title 26. That is really an analysis of, is there a harm to the public by this profession? If there is a harm, what is the appropriate level of governmental oversight? The principles in chapter 57 are extremely libertarian. Essentially, government should not be involved unless absolutely necessary. And that if government becomes involved, it has to be the least restrictive possible. So we conducted the Sunrise review. I will make sure Lauren and I will send this committee a copy of the Sunrise review, just so you're aware.
Thank you.
Especially for some of the newer members who weren't here during that conversation. And we ultimately decided and recommended to the legislature to do what to recommend a registration. So in a licensure system such as OPR, we have 3 levels of licensure. One is registration, which means it's mandatory for everybody who's doing the activity, but there is no qualifications. 2 is a certification, which is voluntary, but it is based on qualifications. And 3 is a license. It is mandatory and based on qualifications. So examples of all 3 categories are a registration. Let's just use the example that we're talking about, home contractors. It is mandatory for everyone who is doing residential home contracting work over $10,000. But we do not have qualifications to get the registration. A certification. Dietitian.
Sorry, one quick question, just to make sure, people had asked last meeting. That's $10,000 over the course of a calendar year?
It's $10,000 per contract.
Per contract, okay, so if you have. All your contracts are $9,999 all year, but you have 70 of them, you're never gonna
You do
register.
not have to register.
But it's one contract that exceeds 10K or greater, and
And
that's.
then
enough.
you're registered for 2 years.
Okay, thanks.
And
Include overruns on the contract.
yeah, I think once you start doing change orders, yes, you should be cut. If you were at 9,500 and you're doing a change order and adding $2,000 worth of work, you should probably get registered. That would be our office's advice, because now you're a contract over $10,000. And we can talk about the $10,000 limit in a second, but I just want to go back to the 3 different types of licensure that's outlined in the state. It's not just OPR, it's the state's policy. So certification requires qualifications, but it is voluntary. A good example of that is dietitians. Dietitians have master's degrees, some have doctoral degrees, very much qualifications based. But it's voluntary to be certified as a dietitian, and unfortunately, as we all know, anyone can give you diet advice, but only certain people can say they're certified dietitians. So it's a great example of certification. And then licensure is what we all think of as standard. So nurses, teachers, veterinarians, very much qualification based. And very much mandatory. You cannot be a nurse, a teacher, or a veterinarian unless you have the qualifications and the state seal of approval through a license. So we recommended the registration. That recommendation went through 2 legislative years. The threshold amount for what was required to be registered vacillated quite a bit. It was anywhere from $3,000 to $7,500. And ultimately, a bill was passed at 7.5. It was vetoed, and then in the veto override, it was raised to 10,000. So the threshold amount was an area of a lot of discussion and debate. The contract requirement, there's a contract requirement, was also an area of large debate, but in order for us to be able to provide any enforcement in this area, we need a written contract so that we can see what the parties agreed upon. And so that is a requirement, if you're doing work that's over $10,000 in the state, you have a written contract. And the other requirement is insurance, and that was an area of discussion. The other piece that I think is relevant for this committee, particularly reviewing the Act 47 report, is our enforcement power. And I just want to turn to Lauren Lehman, because she'll give a status report of where we are with the program and talk about our enforcement.
So, when in our sunrise report, we really found that the biggest harm, or the one that the law was not protecting against, because there are multiple, Lauren mentioned CAP, the Consumer Assistance Program, there's criminal laws for fraud. The biggest gap was in fraud, and people who were finding that it's judgment proof, they were not able to recuperate or recover certain funds because the person they're pursuing civil action against half the funds. So the insurance covers that. The registration is really what OPR was brought in to target, was consumer awareness about fraud, to pull somebody's authority to practice in the state and create a awareness among consumers that this person had been charged and found responsible for fraud. So that brings us to enforcement, which is the statute that was adopted. It's very clear that OPR's responsibility in this space is to prevent against fraud. It specifically exempts registered contractors from that portion of OPR's umbrella statute. So we have one statute that covers all of our professions, 51 professions we regulate, that has a list of unprofessional conduct in it. And one portion of that unprofessional conduct is practicing below the standard or incompetent. Registered contractors, at least for the purposes of OPR's regulation, are expressly exempt from the application of that practicing below the standard. And that's to clarify that OPR is not responsible for assessing, monitoring, investigating quality issues. So we don't have the resources for that. We have criminal investigators, and we have a couple of civil investigators, but mostly looking at criminal behavior. What we can help is with fraud. Somebody disappearing with a $7,000 check, leaving a hole in a roof and not coming back again. We can take enforcement action against that. We receive a complaint. There's 6 investigators, criminal investigators, 3 civil investigators. They go out and they do a full investigation as with any law, they're certified law enforcement. They then bring that investigation back to the office. They would consult with our advisors. So we have 2 advisors for this profession. They consult with the advisors, in what's called an investigation team meeting. They would determine whether this constituted fraud, and if they thought that it constituted unprofessional conduct. We have 4 prosecutors that would then, one of whom would then bring charges against this individual. There would be a full due process hearing under the Administrative Procedures Act or an administrative law officer. And then, the consequences, if it was determined that disciplinary action was necessary, that this person engaged in unprofessional conduct through fraud, they would, there would be, their license, their registration could be revoked, it could be conditioned, it could be suspended, it could be reprimanded or warned. And that decision would then be publicly available, not just on, if you're looking, we have you can look up contractors on our website, look up licensees. We have a map, they find a contractor in the area, associated with that name would be the warning, the reprimand, conduct decisions. So I'm looking for somebody in my area to do work, I go to this list, there's a map, see 20 contractors in that area. I say, oh, this guy has been disciplined for this behavior, here's a conduct decision. I, as a consumer, can make the choice of whether to engage that individual for services. What we can't do is if somebody calls to complain and says, I, had contracted for, this level of services and I feel they weren't done appropriately, the tile's crooked, the floors don't meet code. Like height or the stairs don't meet the correct. We don't have the resources to go out and assess that, we don't have the expertise, our investigators don't have that expertise. So that's the line we've been communicating and talking to folks about. It's a hard one to draw at the same time as we're building, we're trying to bring this community together and get everybody on board for registration. So that's our enforcement. I'm gonna jump into where we are, where we're going.
That's a good question. So although it's not your job to deal with the criminal side of things. So what are could you just say very briefly what the other remedies are for a dissatisfied customer and then to whom those are reached?
Certainly, so we have a close working relationship with the Consumer Assistance Program, which is run jointly by the Attorney General's Office and the University of Vermont. And their process is really one of mediation, so they receive a complaint, they reach out to the contractor and they try to come to some agreement. There's also civil court remedy, you can sue somebody for breach of contract or for other things, you have my money and you didn't perform as you said, if there's no contract. You can also, there is criminal life, so the Attorney General's office could pursue charges against a fraudulent actor. And there is a home contractor fraud list out there with certain requirements for being allowed to practice again.
And I'll just say one of the reasons why this was housed with OPR, I think, was the fact that we do have criminal investigators. So our investigators can issue citations and refer the case either to the Attorney General's office or the local essays. So there was some feeling in the legislature and quite a bit of testimony that these cases were not prioritized at the local law enforcement level because local law enforcement didn't always see it as a crime. And one of the appeals of OPR was that we had this team of criminal investigators.
Right, and we have that coordination, so they're criminal investigators, their jurisdiction over what they can prosecute, what they can kind of bring to our prosecutors is limited to this administrative law remedy, but they can coordinate the state's attorney and criminal court. And then I think there was a feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it wasn't always prosecuted and the homeowner fraud or the home improvement fraud list wasn't the kind of level of fraud you had to engage in to get on that list was so high because of just the resources available for prosecution in the criminal space, both at the Attorney General level and the state's attorney level, meant that many of these cases weren't being brought for prosecution, and then the home fraud list was not capturing everybody. So this space would mean everybody had to be registered. It was more encompassing of more comprehensive of the entire community.
And the other piece was just the opaqueness of criminal court and civil court. It's hard for the average Vermonter to figure out who's been prosecuted in criminal court and who has a suit against them in civil court. The hope was by creating a public list, so that would increase the consumer's exposure. I do think it's a limited hope. I don't know how many of you have looked up your barber or your dentist or your nurse or your veterinarian. I encourage you to do so. It's very easy to do. All the functionality that we're talking about for home contractors exists for all of the licensees that we regulate. But I don't think Vermonters are really accustomed to using that tool. And we need to get the word out more for all of our professions, but certainly for home contractors.
If someone gets flagged as suspended on the registry, how long do they stay flagged as such? And is there a remedy for them to get off, back into good status?
That is something that we're working on. If you are warned or reprimanded, it is permanent. So for most of our professions, because of interstate practice, we wanted other states to know this person has been warned or reprimanded and to be aware of any criminal history or professional disciplinary history. So there's not really an option. One option that we could do would be conditioning a license saying you can still practice, but you need to take XYZ coursework and pay a fine or some other condition or be supervised for a couple of months. That, if it's not accompanied by a warning or a reprimand, can't be removed.
And then a condition for suspension, a condition is on the license for as long as the condition exists. And the person, usually there's terms of the condition that need to be fulfilled. And then after the terms are fulfilled, the person petitions to have the condition removed. And for a suspension, there is a process to request a removal of a suspension, which then typically moves into a conditioned license and then ultimately stepped down.
You were mentioning consumers basically learning to use the websites, like, oh, good idea to check in, especially before I spend $25,000 remodel. Have you kept track of how many searches you've seen in the last year or something like that? Do you have any sort of website visits?
That's a great question. I don't know if we have that. We don't run it on our website. We run it within our applications. I'd have to ask our software. But that's a great question.
Well, it'd be nice to see if the people are starting to be aware of it, use it, and then protect themselves from exposure to people who don't have a good track record.
And I think that leads really well into what we're doing to kind of get that awareness out there. We started, the law was set up as kind of to allow a long leeway for compliance because we didn't have a list of folks who were practicing before this went in. And so ensuring people were aware of their obligations under the law, we took a long time. So it went into effect April 1st, 2023, where you're required to be registered, but nobody can be prosecuted for unauthorized practice. That means nobody can be charged with failing to register until April 1st of this year. So we have this long leeway where you're required to register, but you can't get in trouble for not registering. And so last year, April 1st, I think actually a month before that, so March 1st or the end of February last year, we sent an email to about 23,000 people in Vermont based on who's registered their businesses with the state, NAIC codes, and Google searches, good old fashioned Google searches, working with our partners and interest groups and other licensees like architects and engineers from the state to get the initial word out about this. We've done media visits. Secretary Kuplan-Hansis and Deputy Secretary Hibbert have done several interviews on WCAX, WPTZ, WPEV, like getting the word out, getting interviews out there. Recently, in our second big push, we again sent an email to the 23,000 We sent a snail mail poster around the state as to folks as well. With I don't, did we get the QR code? We did, we have a QR code, so.
Two different.
Two are, one is for registering and for the public on how to look up your contractor, and so we're hoping to get that kind of dispersed throughout the state.
And that went to all lumber yards, home goods purveyors like Agway, Abishans and those types of places. With a letter requesting them to post it, 2 copies of the poster. And then we also have sent it to all of the town clerks. So that they can be posted in town halls, hopefully by the permit.
Are you seeing registrations?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah, they've started to go up. We're hoping to, you know, just through word of mouth in the community that folks are starting to become aware that this is a state obligation. So that's our big push, and we have seen numbers go up, and we have significant number of FAQs on the website. We have a dedicated licensing administrator who works solely on contractors. She also works on other professions, but she's focused on contractors right now. We've devoted a lot of staff resources to ensuring folks that might have difficulty registering or are bumping into problems with the website, have somebody there who can answer questions 24/7, not 24/7, but within 1 to 3 days. She does, and it does seem 24/7 now, but and you can email 24/7 and call. So within 1 to 3 days, we have responses. So we're really, you know, putting our resources into supporting folks as they try to get licensed and doing our best to get the word out there.
if I'm a carpenter but working for a contractor, do I register as a carpenter or does the contractor register because she or he is the one that's actually got contracts with customers?
It's a great point, and that is, this is the only person who needs to register is the person who signs their name on the contract with the homeowner. So if you're a subcontractor and working for a contractor, if you're an employee of a contractor, you do not need to register with OPR. Similarly, if you already hold a license with the state as an architect, an engineer, an electrician, you don't need to register with OPR. So there's, I think, 6 exceptions that are included in the written testimony. But there really is only limited to the person who's engaged with the homeowner in that right for the service to provide the services.
Sure, Martin.
Thank you. I have some questions about the stuff, which I know you were also looking at.
Yes, that's where we're hitting.
I wanna, like, if you have more to say though, I don't wanna.
Well, I think the only piece that we would wanna add and make this committee aware of is where we are with our rulemaking and certification building. So if your question is on that, then we could answer that, or we could answer it later, but we wanna make sure that we touch.
Sure, might pertain to it, so.
So the other authority we're granted is the authority to create certifications. As Lauren mentioned, certification is like a dietitian. Anybody can provide a service, but to hold themselves out to the state as certified and qualified, they would get a voluntary certification from OPR. The statute authorizes OPR to develop these certifications for various trade and specialties related to residential construction. So if you have a specialty in energy efficiency, if you have a specialty in roofing, we could build a certification for that. We have the authority and rule in the statute to make rules regarding that. And our plan is to work with the special interest groups to identify legitimate certification training pathways. So third-party trainers, educators who provide quality education and training in these spaces that OPR can then verify has been accomplished and issue a certification. There are tons of third-party certifiers out in the world, private certifiers, who for $50 will call you whatever you want to be called. We have to sort those guys from the folks who are providing legitimate education and training. We can do all that through rulemaking. As this has been a very gradual adoption of the the statutes, the rulemaking has, and because of other reasons, the rulemating's been delayed. So we are now looking at the end of this year, we're really hoping, and we've met with constituent interest groups this past couple of months to talk about that pathway toward building certifications. And the rule, and within the rulemaking, and identifying legitimate certifiers, certification bodies, and how to build that in terms.
Can you just say a little bit about the simple contract before we go?
Sure, so I think the law provides very rudimentary requirements for what is required in the writing. And OPR, as a way of just reminding folks of what is required, has put a template on our website with a very clear warning on the top. This is not legal advice. This may not be a great contract. Please talk to your lawyers. But it includes all of those components from the statute. So time, labor, materials, estimated cost, dates, those kind of very basic elements, signatures of both parties in our process for change order as well.
And I just will say that that's a great example of the struggle with implementing this program, getting this program passed. There was a lot of testimony and pushback that the concept of a written contract was too burdensome, too confusing for contractors. It was a very sometimes very demeaning testimony related to home contractors who are for the most part very sophisticated individuals who have complex training, complex knowledge, certainly are small business men and women. It was interesting. It was a rocky legislative path, I would say. And there was significant pushback. So you'll see in the way that the program was adopted and ultimately the way that we are getting the program going is we're still adapting and responding to that legislative history. So for instance, we didn't want to go out and just immediately adopt rules until we understood all of the questions that we were going to get from this community as we were registering them so that we could make sure that we were answering them with the rules. So we have taken, I think, a very measured response to how we're implementing the rules. And now we want to do that. We want to go through the rulemaking process with the certifications in them. And the goal is to build those in a way that we can accommodate many through a limited number of certification paths. So Lauren, last week you gave a great example. You know, it may be that 7 programs would meet one certification because certifications wouldn't be specific to a single provider. It would be you need 30 hours of training plus a test on this subject area, and 30, 6 different providers could meet that requirement. So but we need to work on that with the stakeholders, really understand what it means to be well qualified in energy efficiency, for instance. What training do you need? So that it's not specific to one training provider, but it's the standard.
And you do have a ongoing working group, correct?
We have one advisor, we put out a call at least 3 or 4 times for a second advisor. So we need another advisor. And then we do rulemaking through public meeting where everyone is able to come, and our advisory meetings are public as well. So
Is Jim Bradley working with?
he is one of our advisors.
And he is our advisor. And we,
Easy to call a meeting that way.
we've worked with him, he's provided us a list of starting list of certifications we need, but we're also, with advisor professions, there's distinct models of regulation, but within advisor profession, what we usually do in rulemaking is a lot of work before we get to the ICAR process, before we get filed, working with interest groups, before we even start drafting the rule, and then once we draft.
Pre-rulemaking phase.
Yeah, and we do a lot of pre-rulemaking interactions. We don't want to get to the ICAR public hearing stage and have to rewrite everything, so.
Senator Watson, then Senator Moore.
Thank you. So I don't know if you're familiar, were you on the working group that?
We were not official members, but we did visit and we were frequent listeners.
Okay, so you may be familiar with some of the recommendations that came out of Like, if this, you know, just looking at this chart, there are three recommendations that pertain to OPR, and one of them, it sounds like you're already doing, develop a certification designation for contractors trained in the energy codes and include the certification on the OPR contractor registry. So if you're in process, it's happening. If you feel like we don't need to necessarily include it in 253, but I mean, that's.
We have the authority to do it under the rules, and it's obviously one that we would want to build. And it would be, just a matter of identifying how we verify and training enemies.
And that's specific to, I mean, you talked about energy efficiency, what are you thinking of one for energy codes?
We could build that, for sure.
You could.
It would be a matter of determining so OPR's sole role in that would be verifying that the individual coming to us for applying for that certification has the training. And so we would just need to know what that training needed to constitute, say, okay, I see you completed that training, check, we'll issue the license, but we need to know what that training is first.
One, another question that I may have for the group more broadly here is, you know, should training on the energy codes be rolled into a larger training on energy efficiency?
That could happen.
I don't know what the best course would be there. If I can go to a different one.
Sure.
So there's one that says require OPR to update contractor registry, so contractors explicitly not acknowledge RBC's her legal requirements. And I assume that is the box.
Sort of, we talk about it as a checkbox.
Check the box when you register, and I've heard through other sources that you all are open to that. Just wanna check in with you about that.
Yeah, I think we're absolutely open to that. The question, we always have is what would we do with that data? We collect a lot, for midwives and societies, and we collect all of their practice data every 2 years. We really don't have much to do with that. So what would we do if somebody checked the boxes on RDs and then didn't 100% comply with the RDs? We, again, don't do quality, don't really have the expertise to assess or do that. We stay in the fraud space. So it's really just a question of what we would do if somebody failed to comply after saying.
Right, they didn't check the box, as a consequence.
Or they checked the box and didn't.
And
Oh, sure.
I think too, in the concept of this program and the concept of the conversations with Act 47, I think there's a trajectory for the program, right? And we're sort of only 5 feet off the ground. But there could be a trajectory that could involve a multitude of things. It could be taking the program entirely out of OPR and putting part of fire safety. I'll tell you, in the legislative conversations and frankly battles, that was so far off the table that it was a non-starter. So even putting it at OPR in some ways was a compromise. It could be that, so long-term, 40, 50 feet off the ground trajectory, and hopefully it never falls, because that's what happens in a trajectory, I understand. But, gravity.
No gravity, no gravity.
But,
Yeah, it's good.
It could be that long-term, it's within Department of Fire Safety. There's steps that could happen before that, or alternate orbits, which could be that we would have inspectors in our office that are trained on some of the things that are being talked about here, but that's expansion of staff, it would be resources, it would probably be general fund, because frankly, this program is not and has not and likely will not sustain itself on its own licensing fees, which is a problem with the OPR funding model. But we have spent, I would say, multitudes of hundreds of thousands of dollars on this program, and we have probably under $250,000 as from licensure fees. So we are losing money on this program right now, which comes at a cost to our other licensee groups. So if we needed to do things like have inspectors or verify quality, it's going to need additional resources, but certainly possible. And there's other again, other orbits, it could go, the whole program could transfer to fire safety. Or if we could use inspectors at fire safety. To do some of the verification work, as certainly if there was permits for building in the state, that would be extremely helpful. This program is built around sort of extending the physics metaphors, and probably because Senator Watson is my son's teacher, I'm thinking that and he loves black hole, but there's sort of there's a black hole in the state.
Yeah.
Which is building permits, and so everything we're doing is building around the black hole.
You know what happens, the thing's next to a black hole.
So, but if we had, it's, yeah, it's a gravity, yeah, or as Joseph used to say, it's little
Well,
gravity.
Gravity.
But, it, if we had building permits and people were, given a building permit and at the beginning and passed or failed the building permit at the end of a project, then the Office of Professional Regulation would have something tangible. We could use that as evidence, we could use the inspector as evidence. So there's a whole lot of things in the future that could happen that would help us with the program substantially, whether or not it stays in-house.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about many times in the working group that it was probably a 7-year transition. I don't know where that magic number 7 comes from, but that we're building towards a better system, right? Helping people promulgate get the rules out there, help people learn how to meet the energy code requirements, how to certify that things are built that way, and we a net gain for everyone in the state. Biggest investment you ever made, like to make sure it was well constructed.
And we really are, OPR really is the foundation of that by building this kind of understanding of who's out there practicing. Who's, so that you can reach those folks, so you can get the education out there, you can get the training and the knowledge of who's out there.
Quick question to follow up on yours before we go on back to you. The certification of knowledge that RVs and CVs exist. So I had, not to get too into detail, but I had imagined it as a checkbox. You could not complete registration without checking the box. You have to certify that you acknowledge they exist. Then you can complete your registration. That would help a lot of people skip. It's a design plan, but we are trying to make sure that people say, we here, rightly or wrongly, whatever, I was unaware. So we need to push for acknowledgement of awareness.
We could do that, we could embed a link, we could definitely make it a hard stop, so if you don't acknowledge it, you can't move forward in the application. And embed a link to the RVs, what becomes difficult is if you say, I will comply with, I attest to that, and then they don't. We have no kind of space or ability or authority.
We were gonna steer away from a compliance question, but and knowledge.
Yeah, and that would be very, yeah.
Thank you. There's one more that pertains to OPR, which is authorize OPR to update their contract requirements and template contractor owned agreements to include a clause acknowledging that energy codes are mandatory, which I think is referring to that template contract that you have. It's not legal advice, right? That one.
Right.
Do you need the authority to update the contract to include that? It sounds like, I'm guessing you already have that authority.
We have the rating, I think we need authority to make that a requirement of it. Again, thinking about what are the legal consequences of failure to do it, OPR would not be able to enforce a failure to comply, even if it was agreed to.
Right, I think it's really how the language is drafted. I agree with Lauren, it would need to be legislatively added to the requirements of the contract. But again, we would prefer that it be education at this point and not that the contract work will comply. Just because what do we do if it doesn't? It creates a false expectation for the consumer that we will be able to enforce it, and we will be able to.
Right, and so this feels like a sort of the first step of,
Yeah.
let's just put it in.
If you put it in the template and it's out there, It becomes, so then it becomes a contractual requirement for both parties, so the homeowner and the contractor have to agree to abide by the RVs. And then what happens when they don't? Is that a breach of contract? Is that a violation of state law? That's the kind of. What's comes.
And those ramifications are exactly why, if this is the direction you choose, we would say the consumer and the contractor acknowledge that RVs exist and, and are aware of the obligations of RVs, but not that the project itself will comply with it. Again, it's like a first step, and we both acknowledge that what we're saying probably is not what this group would want ideally, but again, we're in the beginning of the trajectory.
So I asked council, just for all of process wise, to be clear, to draft on A4 through A6, some language, and then as soon as we have that, I'll get that committee and we'll post it on our website and send it to you all, so that you can help us get the words right. And appreciate the fact that you're really willing and interested to do all these things, and we just want to say it in a way that is actually clear and helpful to you, as opposed to somehow burdensome in a way that we would not have intended. So Senator McCormick and Senator McCombs.
Yeah, I've rethought the question, I don't.
Is there a direction been picked on whether when you sign a contract with a contractor and the contractor hires a subcontractor as to where the responsibility lies, if they something goes anywhere?
The contractor that signs.
The person who signs the contract, so with the homeowner. So the person who's registered with OPR, is the contractor, the one who contracts with the homeowner for over 10K. And then if they decide to stick with the contractor, then decides to subcontract that work to a subcontractor, it's the contractor's liability. So they need to oversee their subcontractor such that fraud doesn't occur.
Pile up in the highway.
No, dealing with it in finance over
Yeah.
stringing wire and stringing.
The
Fire.
person who gets in the crash is responsible. The front of the line is responsible for everybody behind.
That's right. Each
Yeah.
person sues one of it.
Any committee questions? So one, thanks for all the work behind the scenes. I think a lot of people don't appreciate how much has been happening, because it's not like that visible publicly yet. And it's great timing for us in terms of being able to piggyback on that work and move ourselves a little further along.
I'll just say that this program has continues to have significant support from the Office of Professional Regulation and the Secretary of State. Our Secretary of State supports very concerned about climate and does see this profession and how we build our homes as foundational to helping with our climate crisis. And we just want to be as transparent and clear as possible about what we can do and what we can't do, so that we set expectations correctly. And we will be advocates for an expansion of the program within ourselves, within the state, certainly building codes, that black hole, this office is supportive of fixing, because we do see it as a central issue. And we understand that it's a 7-year timeline to fix the black hole, which is actually remarkable, when you think about what it is, but we are really supportive of this program, of the concepts, of the expansion of the program, ultimately of enforcement of some standards for this program. Whether or not that can occur within our office is, I think, further put down the line of conversations, but we just really support this program.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're a comfortable tag team.
Oh, we do it all the time.
Hey, Lauren.
In some community, we're called the Lawrence.
For exponentially awesome.
I don't know if we have Mr. Bradley Knox, this is not here, but
No, I'm,
are you?
I am,
The part of Mr. Bradley will be played by
by me, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, Please join us at the table, another alumnus of the summer working, the fall working group. So you're here to speak on behalf of whom, just so we.
Home Builders Association.
Great.
Hi, good morning, Colin Frisbee, the owner of Sterling Homes, a member of the Home Builders Association. I was part of this summer study committee. I believe it was the third time that I've gone through the process of the RB's update process and what that looks like and feels like. And so thankful for your time today. What you're doing here is important. It is important to Vermonters, and so that they have safe, healthy homes. The process currently, in my opinion, is broken. Every 3 years, we get told we have to update it because we have to update it. And we go through a process that I don't know that it serves Vermonters super well from a thoughtful approach to energy efficiency. All for energy efficiency, think it's a great thing. I think it needs to be done well. 6, 9, 12 years ago, energy efficiency and the RB's code, the state energy code, did things that improved how builders out there were doing things, but stayed generally true to the practices of how homes had been built traditionally. And change is a good thing. You said earlier that you're open-minded and you're open to change, as we all like to think we are, and that's a wonderful thing. The challenge with change is that we need to make sure that we make change for the better, not just for the different. And so from the home builder's perspective, the unity of command, having a organization that understands all of these things is tremendously important. I don't know, it's probably 12 or 15 years ago that I spent a bunch of time down here trying to get a builder registry program going that didn't work and is now finally starting to come along. And so there are some good things that can happen with all of that. But from a builder's perspective, without a unity of command, there's nobody that is looking at the RBs to see if it's good building science. Is what we're instructing to happen a good idea? This particular year, and I think Jason will testify more on this later, but they changed the recommendations within a week of the LCAR hearings. Fundamentally, it changed the building science from a continuous R10 to a continuous R5. That is a big difference from a building science perspective and how that wall assembly performs. But that didn't get reviewed by a committee of advisors that had the expertise to rule on whether in our climate zone, as green building advocates talk about, whether that was a good idea. And so whether it is or not is not what we're here to talk about today. But Sun said unity of command, and he was, I don't know, for 400 years BC. So the concept has been around a long time. And if you look at it across our society, the unity of command, so that when I have a question as a builder, right now there's no building code in Vermont for a single family residential home. There is an energy code, but no building code. So the state is essentially telling me as a builder, insulate it well, we don't care if it falls down, but make sure it's well insulated when it does. As long as I insulate it well, when it falls down, I'm all good. That's obviously absurd, but I don't think very many people think about how building codes came about to make sure homes were safe. The fires in the 20s and all of the reasons that building codes came about. You're not going to find very many times that a builder sits in front of you and tells you they want more codes. That's not our nature. It's not normally what we want. But with the energy code right now, continuing to get so stringent, without the scaffolding and the support of a building code that makes sure it's safe. I think Vermont, if we allow the adoption to go forward on July 1st, is going past a point of where we are doing good for Vermonters. And that we're gonna do more harm than good and damage to homes, unintended consequences, because this building science stuff is really tricky. I happen to have a undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering. And that just probably makes me more aware of how little I know, because it is complicated, how vapor drive works through a wall assembly and all of those things. All of that to say that having a unity of command, somebody from legislative authority all the way down through the towns, so that we understand who do we ask questions to, who rules if there's a difference of opinion between what the energy code says and say I'm building a duplex where the state fire safety has authority, is an authority having jurisdiction that tells me what I have to do. Who rules if there's a conflict between those two things? Shouldn't there be that person as well for a single family home in Vermont? I think there's a good cause for why that would be important and helpful. And then also if we could have the questions, if you can ask if the single authority having jurisdiction also oversaw the training and oversaw or understood what the training requirements were so that they could help OPR understand those things, or wherever that happened to live, the certifications, where they live matters less to us, as long as there's one in the industry, one neck to choke, one place to go to get an answer, to understand what's going on. Because what the current rules are, is that me, the owner who signs a contract with the person, I get to be the one neck to choke in this scenario. But I don't have somebody I can ask on a single family home energy stuff. And so there's no place for those questions to go. If we go to the Department of Public Service, wonderful folks, well-meaning, well-intentioned, not building scientists. That is not their business, that's not what they do. And so Efficiency Vermont won't rule on a question of the rule, because that's not theirs. And then it goes over to OPR, and we end up with all these different things, and the builders get left a little bit to figure it out in the middle, which seems like a poor plan. And to just kind of go back to the beginning, what we're doing is important. What we're encouraging to be built, let's make sure we want it, or encouraging what we actually want. And so that unity of command seems so important to us. In all other states, we're the only state, I believe, without a building code at all. And so with an energy code that doesn't connect to a building code that provides the scaffolding, the structure for safety. We want efficient homes. We want people healthy, happy, and living in these homes for a long time. So we're all for all of those things. We want better systems. We want processes that work, and that every other state that I'm aware of, when they update their energy code, they apply that code to the climate zone they're in. There has to be modifications based on those climate zones, just because if you're in Florida, you're worried in a cooling climate as opposed to here with a heating climate, and all of the things that change about a wall assembly as you think through those pieces. Brevity is the soul of wit. The questions for me.
Deborah Gorman.
Can you give me a hypothetical of what it would look like where the energy code creates a problem because of the lack of a building code?
I think that's a fantastic question. And so right now, I alluded to the fact that they changed from an R10 to an R5 continuous insulation on the outside of the wall. the best building scientists that I follow would say in this climate zone, at some point with that R10 with less than R10 continuous insulation, the dew point in our climate zone is gonna be in the wall. You are gonna have wetting inside the wall. You need to make sure you have a drying path for that wetting that occurs in the wall.
And the energy
Improperly done, you end up with no drying path and you end up with rot.
And the energy code does not take that into account?
Well, the way we adopt it certainly doesn't, because there's not the advisory committee of building scientists. And then the energy code can then promote things that perhaps structurally aren't sound or push you in directions that way.
I understand the drying pad, as a young hippie doing my own insulation,
Right.
I ended up having to rip a whole roof out.
Unfortunately, and the interesting piece is that you're not alone. The other piece is, back then, and I don't mean to judge that it was more than a couple of weeks ago, but at some point, our products have gotten much better in a lot of ways, and we restrict airflow much better. If you get 99% of it, that 1% that you missed becomes like a blowtorch of bad. And you end up with much worse problems in that one area. It focuses it. But the house I grew up in was built in 1851. It didn't have a stitch of insulation in it. Dried like a champ though, right? Like, so it's still standing today. A whole bunch of the homes,
A little chilly in the winter.
a little chilly, you get another log on the fire, you're good to go. We try to do the same thing over and over again, we're not as good as Jason is at that. I live in fear that maybe we're making a mistake and we're doing it over and over again right now, and we don't know it. Because you didn't know when you were insulating that it wasn't a good thing.
Pile as much in as I could and seal it up tight.
Right, you're doing the right thing, and so we wanna have that single authority having jurisdiction that can answer those questions. That can make sure we're doing the right thing, because what we don't wanna have happen, and we got to this process where it got pushed off to July 1st. Because at the LCAR hearings for the RVs, everybody realized there were some 7 days articles that highlighted a bunch of the building failures. Which are important, and so that timing of what happens. We wanna be more efficient, but if it makes us unhealthy in the pursuit of that more efficient. Then that's not good, and the greater good hasn't been served. If we have to tear a bunch of stuff out, that is clearly bad for the environment. That life cycle analysis will become horrible.
Senator Watson?
Thank you. I have so many questions for you about building science, but I'm gonna hold off on those. So one of the suggestions from this document, and you were part of the group that
Yes.
built it,
Yeah.
so, one of the things here, it says designate DFS as the statewide authority having jurisdiction, and when you talk about unity of command, I'm translating that to, the AHJ.
Correct.
Seems like a,
Authority having jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's a funny
Everybody likes their
acronym.
acronyms, yes.
and, and in this document, it's got a little check mark under 2024, which tells me that this is the direction that it seems like we could go sooner rather than later. We have not talked to DFS about this, but, sorry.
They've been part of the conversation during.
I think we took an informal poll of a group of like 20 of us, like, what? How many people think we should sort of, the union command move to reduce the fire safety? Because they already do all the stuff for multi-unit on us, the fire, plumbing code, electric code, elevators. So they're in buildings doing inspections, so that seems like a very attractive model, right? And but the fire safety basically said, we have no capacity to take that on, so we can't agree to do that. And
Right, DFS and JITs.
and so we didn't end up saying, okay, this is for sure, but I think when we raised hands, like 18 of 20 people in the room said, it seems clear to us that there was a consensus that going that direction made sense. However, we elected the partners were for understandable reasons, that was the direction to go. So the bill doesn't say do that, but I think, we're trying, my sense is the working group would help figure that out. And we're starting to set a course that way. And then it's like, how would you do it?
Right, well, and that's where my thinking is, based on what we just heard from the Secretary of State's office, that. Right now, they're the closest thing seems like we have to authority having jurisdiction. So that maybe not where we're going.
And they don't do anything on quality or
Right,
what
enforcement,
we're doing.
Right, the quality piece.
So they're not looking at whether it's energy efficient or structurally efficient.
So. Yeah, I guess my head is what is in the space of like, what are the intermediate steps that we can take? Maybe it's just directing the working group to continue on this path of figuring out how we move in this direction.
I would like to revisit the language for what the tasks of the working group are. Okay. To make it more definitive, that instead of saying if there should be unity in command, or if there should be fire safety, to say, okay, this is the direction we want to head. How would we do it and start to steer that?
Okay.
I would
That's my
also,
personal opinion on behalf of what the group seemed to land.
I agree with what you said, Senator, and I think that makes sense, that. If we assign authority, if you assign authority having jurisdiction. Those smart folks, whomever they are, whether they live in LPR or DFS or wherever they are, they will help us identify what next steps need to happen and how we are gonna make good choices from there. I don't think anybody in that room thought that anybody was set up to be able to do it tomorrow or next week. It is gonna be a process. It is going to be a journey. The other thing that I kind of left out, that right now the state energy code has 0 inspectors. 0. None. And so there's arguments about, or there's different numbers that you see thrown about as to what the level of compliance is, but there's 0 inspectors.
So we're guessing, not bias.
Yes, it's a self-certifying process. And we're making it harder to do right. And we're making it harder for a well-intentioned person who's trying to do it right, to even know if you're doing it right.
Senator McDonald.
You use the term vapor drive. Is that anything to do with where the frost meets where fresh air?
I think there's probably people that are better at physics in here than I, but wet goes to dry. You know,
That you have a degree in mechanical engineering.
but wet goes to dry, right? So it's gonna go to dry. What's gonna drive it there? The drier air, and so if it condenses on a cold surface before it gets there, you end up with bulk water somewhere you don't want it.
Once upon a time, people just put vapor barriers under their sheetrock. Is that passe?
If you went, that becomes the 6-sided rigid air barrier that the Arby's is promoting. The question is whether that should be an intelligent barrier that allows it to dry to the inside during certain conditions. But that's where all of these things, it is tremendously complicated, and so just passing a rule and saying do better, patting us on the back and saying, the legislators done their job, we've upped the ante on the energy code. Are we making it better for Vermonters?
One quick question on sort of a technical question. Are we, for the most part, in RBs and CBs, would you characterize them as a performance specification or a construction specification? Or is it both?
Jason may help me on this. There have been heretofore prescriptive paths. That if you follow the prescriptive path, if you do X, Y, and Z.
Sort of like the sandwich of a wall.
The sandwich of a wall and you follow this sandwich, then you meet it and you're good to go. They also have paths where you can do higher level analysis to see if you comply, which is less prescriptive. The new code that is slated to go in July 1st, came with no prescriptive path. There is no cookie cutter answer for those who don't have a building that science expertise. There is not, if for someone who doesn't spend their nights and weekends looking at this stuff, there's not a do a 2x6 wall with R21 insulation and this on the outside or whatever that gets you there and guarantees to those folks that they're achieving a good answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quigley. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
We have, so I just want to check, we have 3 more guests, and are all of you, would all of you like to speak?
Just to have been,
Designated ears.
Bob, I've been asked to speak as an individual, but I actually have been, I'm part of AIA. And working hand in hand with AIA, so Bob is physically here because he represents AIA.
I'm just looking at the clock and trying to divvy up our time. So
What is
our time?
We-
We have half an hour. Okay.
And
I can be very fast.
I
College has said it all.
Yeah.
I need 10 to 15 minutes in. Well, each hope for 10.
Great. So, Ms. Hitchum, you're the next on our list, so please, join the table.
Okay.
First, oh, do you want?
Yeah.
Would you rather go
Yeah,
after?
if it's okay.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wait, no,
You wanna go?
yes, I do want to go this. Sorry,
Everyone, this is like Vermonters at a stop sign. Who?
Oh, I don't.
Yeah.
I go too.
So the 4-way sign.
Okay. Great, so, 10 minutes. To take,
If you can, introduce yourself.
yes,
correct.
sorry, it's Sandra Bitstu. I'm a registered architect. I'm also, LEED certified and, various credentials for energy, all my life been involved with efficient engineering, efficient construction, and I'm a member of AIA Vermont. So, to carry forward the conversation about what happened, for instance, if one install R5 and the building began to fall apart. The problem now is that there's no one to call if the building starts to fail, if your siding falls off. There's no one to look at it and talk about how to fix the code better. How to improve the code, like, oh, maybe the R5 was a bad idea. And there's no one to come and kind of make sure it was done correctly during construction. Or no way of kind of checking in to make sure the building was completed as was discussed. And the chokehold that there may be a code, but if the owner doesn't want to continue it, there's no way to make sure that happens. That the builder kind of gets in the position of having to defend our lease. So I think we're all in agreement, including, I think we're all so grateful to OPR for having furthered the builder certification. So we have been working on what do we really hope gets passed this year. I think we had basic misunderstanding of, we didn't want to repeat the exact study code of last year with repeating a report. Building on that is a fantastic idea. I think the suggestions that we have submitted to try to be helpful in the appearance of actual bill of language, are suggestions of things to add. The first bit, the findings of intent, we took directly from H792. And we felt that there was an excellent summary of the effort that has been made to date. And would help guide further progress to solve the problem. So we hope that could be added. The other things that we crossed out, the hardest thing was that we would really like, even this year, simply identifying. Fire safety, to change its name and just become the authority having jurisdiction. In our estimation, that wouldn't take, there wouldn't have to be a lot of doing behind it. And if they were given 2 years, then this study committee would function as the way to, as how to achieve it and what would it look like. Not really asking the question of who should be the authority, because I think for most people, that's pretty clear. At the end game, but now we wanna move the ball forward, we're talking yard by yard here. So the rest of this in our suggestions are what we hope that your bill will add as short-term kind of emergency things. So number one is that we would ask that the General Assembly accelerate fire safety's move to adopt the IRC for duplexes and single family homes. They already have jurisdiction over rented single family homes. So if we could give them a push, they are beginning to do this for the 3 to 5 year window. They have a study committee started this summer. But there is federal funding, $2 million that Vermont does not have to compete for if it's done soon. So if they had a push simply to adopt a building code for duplexes and rented single family homes, that would be great. It would set the stage for this whole unified authority that we want to go for. The next thing, which I'm going to spend the rest of my time on, is the certification question. Why is this urgent and why can't it just be solved in the study committee? We agree it's a complicated question. However, EFG is working with a grant of substantial funds, and they need that question answered. Who are they helping? And so when we worked on the report this summer with, we were both Bob, actually, all participate heavily on it. When we look at those recommendations, we actually saw that wherever the certification part is, and haven't looked at it in a while, is if the answer is OPR and AHJ. We saw OPR is overseeing the registry part and AHJ overseeing the certification part. And so OPR has been very clear, they do not adjudicate for competence. That is at least half of the complaints that they're getting from people. We see the competence issues, and it does not come from bad intentions, malintent. It comes from the small mistakes and how things get put together. They, believe it or not, how one piece of the vapor barrier at the top of the wall can destroy the entire roof and a family's savings. It is a significant problem. So it's not just, but that person may have filled all of their contractual obligations. Those are competence issues. And right now, the black hole that Lord Hibbert described is the black hole that there is no one for a homeowner to talk to. The reason why people don't know about these failures is there's no place to go. So there needs to be someone that looks at that and certifies the individual. The other difference is that OPR works with the business, and that's for architects. It's very important to distinguish who's signing the contract is the business, but it's the certification who gains the certification that individual gets gains the competence. So we believe, and we've come up with 2 scenarios. You saw the 17th version and the 19th version, but Scott has come up with a really good compromise. If fire safety could stay focused on developing what determines competence for a builder in Vermont. We're talking about 2 levels. One would be basic levels, which would include a building code for duplexes and rented single-family homes. It would include building science principles, and it would include RVs. So there would be a three-part certification. Fire safety already has an incredibly efficient and good system for licensing plumbers and electricians. This would give the state a certification for builders that demonstrates broad competence. The builders I talk to are just as interested in framing and all the issues inside building code as they are in energy efficiency. It all has to work together. There could be an advanced or a tier 2 certification for what we call advanced performance construction techniques, which are for really required for very tight buildings. So that there could be a tier 2, so certificate, business on the registry could show that they have competence at both levels, or maybe just one, or no. That is the heart of this, is that fire safety already has a great system, and then if there is a failure, the first person that shows up for all of these public buildings, first person who gets called is fire safety. If there's a fire, if it's an electrical failure, they're on site before the fire's gone out. And they are just as well trained as the builders and the electricians and plumbers. And they take it apart on site. Of course, the insurance company's there too, but they figure out, was the problem due to the code? Does it need to be improved in Vermont? Or was the problem due to the individual who did the work? That is the key question. And fire safety, by being the overall authority, can either improve the code, or they can discipline, retrain, work, whatever, with the electrician or the plumber, hopefully with the builder. So that becomes a full circle of working together, super efficient. I can't understand the efficiency of having OPR begin to develop, determining that issue, is it the code or the contractor? And with their inspectors, and then sending it over to public service to amend the code, but then it doesn't work with the building codes. So with our black hole, what we've done is we've developed kind of band-aids, really, to try to solve, it's a very real problem. And they overlap, but they don't overlap well. I want to just close with that Venn diagram that I've turned away from. I hope you saw it when you looked at the report.
Things in the circle, things not in it.
Yeah.
Most other states have this. Even Maine and New Hampshire are working towards this, and we're stuck in a bad petri dish. And that's all, I think that's all we architects, because we see this often ourselves from the home builder side, and then kind of what went wrong between the design and the construction side. And we all really care, this is our lives. I think that's the other question, is when these other agencies are involved, they are not actually spending a lot of time on job sites. OPR doesn't they don't really want to go to job sites. Public service, they don't go to job sites for anywhere. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I think that the system we have, OPR has been bootstrapping us along, and that's so I would say a reflection of politics, not necessarily logical thinking, sort of the art of the possible, but we get the registration going. Even though we know that it's just the beginning.
We all tried to get fire safety involved early, but they couldn't be involved. Thank you.
You had kindly printed out I don't know if you have hard copies of your suggestions for us to consider.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna hand, so the 7-page document that I gave Jude 2 days ago is just simple, it's Scott's idea of just inserting into statute a way to get certification through fire safety. And then they would work with OPR. And then the 9-page one that I circulated this morning is a system that puts all authority over certification with fire safety and relieves OPR of the competence issue. Again, we don't want to mess around with OPR. We're so grateful to them for having initiated this oversight. But again, there's a difference between certifying the individual and registering the business. I have a lot of copies of both.
If you'll leave it, like our challenge is that we have a hard stop Friday, so we'll see how
Yeah, we understand that, and we want
much how many passengers we can get on the bus before it leaves this station, but
this is the one,
there will be a bus with other seats when it gets to the house as well.
and let me give this 7-page one. I don't know what I had, but
Sandy, we'll hand it out.
okay, yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Mr. Webster,
I'll be quick.
We have another word, answer. Ma'am, we have.
Sandy, you have another? Do you have one more?
Another one, six.
Okay, so number 9, the 9-page one is the more extreme.
All right, for the record, I'm Jason Webster, my brother and I own and operate Huntington Homes. We do, 75-ish homes a year, have since 1978, qualifying myself. Half of what we build is in Vermont, half is in the rest of New England, most of it being Massachusetts. We're very familiar with how to work under building codes, of which Vermont has none, in these other states.
are you in
Um,
Williamstown? Where's
Your shops in Montpelier.
Oh, you from Silver.
I'm gonna be quick because I think Colin really summarized it, Sandy did too. I think you're aware of the issue. We have a black hole, we have no building codes, we don't want our cake and eat it too with energy codes. And they just don't work that way. Like they just don't work without the organization of the agency of a building code. What Sandy said, and I just want to kind of like to organize it a little bit when she talked about DFS now moving towards adoption of the IRC. Zooming out a little bit, which I think is important to understand, is that right now DFS oversees construction on public buildings and they enforce the NFPA, which is a firefighter's code, right? That is the National Fire Protection Act. That is not a building code. And so a very first step would be to get down to enforce the building code on that type of construction. Hopefully in the future, we could get that to trickle down into single family homes. As Colin said, it's a little strange for a home builder to be asking for no rules. But the reason we're asking for rules, and these are the 2 points I want to make. The reason we're asking for rules is that the energy code is written, puts the builder at enormous risk, right? It tells us what we have to do, but it doesn't tell us or support us to do it. And there is even worse, there's a provision in the legislation, the enabling legislation that says the builder is responsible at their cost to bring a house to code if it doesn't meet code. That's straight line to bankruptcy, right? There's if you miss basement insulation, right, or you put in the wrong mechanical system for the way most houses are built with small companies, it doesn't matter how much you want to try to do the right thing, like you just can't. So there's a lot of risk that's being, because the state has not created the agency to support, train, and license builders and then have them apply and inspect them as they're building it. There's a ton of risk of the builder being the one that has to design, implement, and enforce the energy code themselves. I can't even it's kind of absurd, right? I mean, we never asked, an excavator to design, install and certify a stormwater detention system, right? There's rules around it.
Can you, just go committee on what the IRC is?
IRC is an international residential code. Yeah, so it's an actual building code. Which specifies the things that Colin was talking about, right? When I propose to build a wall assembly in Massachusetts, I have to propose to an agency what I'm gonna build. They review it to say that satisfies. The code is very specific. If I want to use these materials with these R values, this is the layer they have to be, this is the operation of the layer of how they have to be installed. We then build it, they inspect it, they certify us. Liability sort of released from the builder if we built it that way, there's no installation problem, but for some reason the building failed. The builder really is liable, there isn't liability to the builder for following the code and being certified to it. In Vermont, they're most certainly, I mean, everybody's, right, we're the only ones that have. My quick, what I said I was gonna be quick about, my two things that I asked that is in this bill and the importance of them. Is that when we've been a part of the amendments to RVs and CVs, I've been a part of it for 20 years. We've always had the same conversations, right? We have a black hole. This doesn't make any sense. Everybody at the table agrees. But we keep going forward. And one of the reasons we keep going forward is because in the enabling legislation, there is the word shall, right? The DFS or DPS shall adopt shall amend the energy code upon issuance of a new IECC, which is an international code which all states use to model their codes. We are about to enact amendments based on the 2021 IECC, which is the latest available IECC. All the surrounding states around us that have full building agencies are not on the 21 IECC yet. They're still stuck on an 18. They can't figure out how to integrate the 2018 into building codes to build safe houses. Here we are with no agency. Because of the word shall in the enabling legislation, we accepted it and we're just kind of like going with it because the legislation tells us we have to. And so we have all recommended that because the DPS, now they see it too, they know it, that's the conversation we have at all meetings. So it would be the recommendation would be to change in the enabling legislation to change shall to may. So
That's in 253.
yes, so I'm just the importance of that change. Don't let that be, it's just one word, don't forget it, like that's really important. The other thing would be to suspend the adoption of the enactment of the 24 amendments effective July 1st, 2024. This black hole issue, everybody at Elkhart, everybody's acknowledged these issues, everybody's realized it's a problem. Elkhart pushed it out to July 1st, 2024. We have not solved the black hole, right? Nothing has changed between when we had those conversations to where we are today. And as Colin said, there is what was approved by Elkhart, there is some bad building science in that code. If you, as a builder, weren't going to hire somebody to rate and study the energy performance of the building to go down what's considered the performance path of demonstrating compliance with the code. But instead you wanted to just go down the prescriptive path, which is easier. Here's my chart of values. This is what I need to install. The current, what was approved by Elkhart, what's out there right now, what's in front of us all right now, there is a prescriptive path that includes an R21 plus 5. So it means that it's an R21 in the wall cavity with our 5 continuous insulation on the outside. If a builder followed that, we would all have centered performance problem. Every house built that way would have that problem. And I don't know if it's 10 years down the road, I don't know if it's 15, I don't know if it's 20 years down the road, but that wall would be composting from the inside out. And so I don't think that, and that's the easiest path to go to the code, is to go through the prescriptive path. I don't think we want that out there.
Can you just say briefly, we're not trying to solve that code problem, but two things. Why is that a design that's headed for failure?
So in the simplest, it's not guaranteed to go to failure if you build it the right way. But the least expensive, easiest way to build it is wrong. And the least expensive, easiest way to build it would be to frame a 2x6 wall. Put some sort of fluffy insulation in it, the cheapest is fiberglass batt. Sheet it with OSB, because it's the cheapest, and then wrap it with R5 foil faced polyiso insulation. The polyiso insulation is a vapor barrier. It will not allow that wall to dry from the inside to the outside, right? Backing up. What happens in winter is it's 70 degrees and humid inside a house. It's 0 and dry outside. Somewhere in that wall assembly is the condensation point. It is the temperature at which water in the air turns to frost. That frost, sun comes out, warms up the wall, frost turns to water. In the old houses, happens everywhere. Doesn't happen in this stuff, but it happens everywhere that's wood frame construction. In old houses, there's enough energy that goes through the wall. That next day, when you fire up the wood stove, that it pushes that energy out of the wall, or the energy goes through the wall and it dries out that wall to the outside, and so the wall stays dry, it dries it out, right? It gets wet. It's only a problem if wetting is more than drying. Drying is more than wetting, well, fine, no problems. And so what happens is that cheapest wall, right? 2x6 fiberglass batt, OSB sheathing, R5 polyiso. R5 polyiso is a vapor barrier. We can no longer dry the wall to the outside. Water's getting trapped in the wall. It will eventually eat the OSB and your siding starts falling off. It isn't that exact assembly. Last week, some photos ended up in my email of a house in Danville. What's happening? Right, 15-year-old house, you go up to the wall and you can, with your hands, take the OSB off the outside. So that's the problem.
Yeah.
And that is the least expensive way to meet the current code. Now, in fairness, I don't understand, but DPS, I've heard that they're going to create another path that is a way to get through the code that doesn't use the R5 continuous. Nobody's seen it, right? And here, all of us builders, we're building stuff, we're under contract and we're quoting stuff into 2025 right now. And there's now, everything that's being built July 1st is already in motion. And we don't have it in front of us to what it is.
One quick question, so because you sell Massachusetts where there is a building code, do you just take the Massachusetts building code and those practices and incorporate them into everything you do? Is that like your?
We also, yes, so what we do, because we build in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, everyone has slightly different. And this is important to understand about ICC and the adoption of codes. All states, through their agencies that administer building codes, take these model codes, they take the IRC, they take the IECC. They review them and they modify them to their own uses. They take all kinds of testimony, they have building scientists, they have all kinds of stuff. They modify them for that use. So every area has slightly different codes because they can even though they started with the same models, they've modified them or amended them different. And we kind of take a master code across all of them that's going to satisfy everything, and we apply that.
Highest common denominator.
Highest common denominator across to everything. Are there some things that code requires that are difficult, that's a cost, don't add value to the client, aren't gonna be a safety issue that in Vermont we ignore? Yes. If we're in that's.
Chairman McCormick.
Would a clearer collection of energy standards provide you as a builder with, let's say, protective cover? And with an analogy,
Yeah.
years ago, we had a bill, now it's now illegal to smoke cigarettes in an indoor public space. That was very controversial, considering it. One of the things that turned the tide was when the bar owners started asking for it.
Yeah.
The idea being, my waitresses and I are tired of breathing cigarette smoke.
All that long.
But we're also tired of the customers being mad at us if we try to, so you do it and we'll blame you and we'll.
Yes, and then we'll have, yeah, yes. So I think and this is why we asked that, the 2024 amendments are not enacted or not enforced. Is because and Colin alluded to this, is that, since 1990, the energy code's been enacted since 1997. The energy code basically codified good building practice. So whether the builder knew it or not, or whether they were trying to or not, or whether they were informed or not that there was an energy code, they were building to it anyway. To my knowledge, no builder has been sued under the enabling legislation to come back into a house to bring it up to code. But up until now, had the builder built a decent house, the house would have met the code. The current code, though, has gone into some. I didn't even know it was in there. Somebody told me about it the other day, that the current code has a requirement for specific electrical boxes in the wall that are air sealed to the drywall. I didn't even know that was in there, right? Astronomically expensive. If I built a house and didn't put them in, and the client said, hey, by the way, this was a technical requirement of the code that you didn't do. It's for an attorney, it's a slam dunk case to go to the enabling legislation. It's right there, that it's my cost. It's for me to come fix it. Right, and so, in order until we create a building program and agency, which if we want codes, we have to do, it's hard. Right, but you can't have codes and not have an agency. Until we get to that point, we really need to ratchet back the energy code standards back to what we have been building. Because a lot of those is way better. A lot of those that are at a slightly lower energy standard are a lot better than a few houses with handfuls of them having to be rebuilt.
Great, so, does anyone have a last question? Otherwise, we're gonna take a break till 11, and thank you all for, speaking. Mr. Duncan, did you want to?
If you will allow me a few minutes, sure.
Sure, go ahead, I misunderstood.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Bob Duncan. I'm an architect from Burlington. I was thinking about this on the way over here, and this July marks 50 years to be doing this, so I've been around the block a couple times. And just as a sort of bit of background, I was born 7 miles from here, so I'm a very proud Vermonter. And I'm usually very proud when Vermont is the only state that does something. I'm not so proud that we're the only state that doesn't have a building code for single family homes and French duplexes and so on. So having said that, I want to just offer a couple of things. One, I want to reinforce what everyone has said about the postponement of the 24 RVs. It's really critical to think about that because we have a code that's it's going to cause damage if people build to the specifics of that code. And when this came up at LCAR a year ago this May, when we discovered there had been some changes in the code from what those of us who were on the study committee thought the code was going to be in the previous January, we panicked and came to LCAR and said, you really got to think about this. And if someone else mentioned there was simultaneous with the Vermont Digger article that had a lot of people upset. And LCAR, I believe, was right to postpone it. Unfortunately, the problems with it have not been corrected. So postponing it, so not putting it into effect last year, there's no sense in putting it in effect this year because the problems haven't been corrected. I just want to be clear about that. I also want to just talk briefly about the compliance rate of the code. And just for people to know, there was a study done that says that RVs has approximately 54% compliance rate. That study was done during the pandemic. I believe, please don't quote me, but I believe it was a study of 25 or 35 homes, and they came up with 54% compliance. And AIA Vermont has done a study comparing the required RV certificates that are supposed to be filed when a project is completed versus the building permits that are issued in the state. And we come up with a comparison of 8.5%. So I don't know how, this is not a scientific study, it's not an exhaustive study, but it was just looking at these two things to see where we stand. So we know that compliance isn't anywhere near 54%. It might not be as low as 8.5%, but I can attest to you that during the pandemic, I don't do a lot of single family homes, so we do that occasionally. And I was asked to do some work for a former client. And so I did a set of drawings and a small outline specification. One of the things in that specification is that the contractor has to comply with ARPIS. So this homeowner went to 4 different contractors in Chittenden County. 3 of those 4 contractors read it and asked the question, what is ARPIS? I mean, that's pretty profound. Now, that's 3 out of 4. They're small builders, you know, they're not, maybe there you might colloquially call pickup contractor because, you know, small people are working hard, but they don't know the code even exists. So how are they going to comply with it? So that was a big eye opener for me. The final thing that I wanted to talk about, and I developed an analogy that I just want you to consider about how codes are adopted and how they are enforced in Vermont. And as you're, I'm sure, aware, so we have an energy code that's developed by the Department of Public Service. And that's what the legislature asked for, and asked for that to happen every 3 years or whenever the other codes are whenever the other codes are adopted. And residing in that is the opportunity to enforce the code. But the Department of Public Service doesn't do that. So I want to give you an analogy, and I want you to just think, imagine you're in this room literally 50 years ago to the day. And OPEC has changed the world by reducing the output of oil. And everybody's panicked. Gas prices have doubled in like 3 weeks. And we're concerned about this energy crisis. And so good thinking and well-meaning legislators in the legislature have said, well, one way we can save energy is we just, you know, the interstate system is now up and running. It's 1974. It's been up and running for a couple of years statewide. And people are driving like 70 and 75, 80 and 85 miles an hour on the interstate. And we could probably save energy and help Vermonters if we established a lower speed limit on the interstate. So, but who's going to figure that out? So we say, well, who deals with cars? The Department of Motor Vehicles. So we charge the Department of Motor Vehicles to figure out what's the speed limit that we should ask for in Vermont so that we can save energy and save gas. And at the same time, we say the Department of Motor Vehicles, once you figure that out, you should enforce it. So the law gets passed, DMV takes us on, and they're like, we don't know how to figure this out, so we bring in a consultant, which is exactly what the Department of Public Service does to help write the code. So we bring in a consultant, and they think about this, and they come back and they say, well, we think that the number is 60 miles an hour. But the problem is, we don't have vehicles, we don't have people that can enforce it, we don't know how to do that. So we think it should be 60 miles an hour, and we think all Vermonters should drive no more than 60 miles an hour. Self-certify that you're not gonna evade the speed limit. So then, well, that doesn't work because everybody's driving 70, 75 miles an hour because nobody's enforcing it. So this group of concerned citizens comes into the room and they say to you, you know, it was great that you passed this law. We totally support this. We all believe in energy efficiency. We all believe in saving energy. What we think is that you should actually have the Vermont State Police do this because they got the cars, they know the law, they know how to do this. The problem is the head of the state police says, I don't have enough cars, I don't have enough officers, and so I can't really do it. Which is analogous to Mike DeRocher and the Division of Fire Safety, who doesn't have staff and doesn't have the funds to do it. So you say, well, then what do we do? Well, the only option is we gotta go back to DMV and say, the registration fees go up, driver's license fees goes up. We gotta do something to generate the money to enforce the law. So here we are, we have an energy code that's not enforced. We have an energy code that's not adjudicated. An energy code that nobody can ask a question about because it says here do this, but my wall on this building, I can't really do that. What do I do and how do I work together with this? We don't have a place to do that. And so bringing this under the auspices of Division of Fire Safety, even if it's a 7-year process, as was alluded to earlier, it's the direction we have to go in and we have to figure it out. But it's really important for us to look at this in a way that is going to be healthy for Vermonters. We're gonna build houses that aren't gonna rot. And then we're gonna have a method and a system under which we can operate, which everybody can operate. So think about it very seriously about all that's in front of you. There's a lot of information there, but hopefully that analogy helps you a little bit to understand where we're at and why it doesn't really work. And then perhaps we can move forward together and come up with some solutions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duncan. So with that complete our plan this fourth day, we'll make revisions. Let's figure out as a group how much we want to push on in this draft. And get something out this week. So really very helpful to make it very clear and crisp what the issue is and
I missed it. Can they repeat it?